Hi everyone, I'm John Nepper. I am the Trust and Connection Maximizer. Welcome to another episode of To Talk Smart, where I am interviewing the movers and shakers, the heavy hitters of the National Speakers Association. My guests will share their ideas and their strategies about growing a successful speaking business and having some fun doing it. Topics will fit into the National Speakers Association 4 E's of the speaking business, including enterprise, expertise, eloquence, and ethics. My guest on this episode of To Talk Smart is Jack Mackey, president of the National Speakers Association, Kansas City's chapter. Jack was raised by a frustrated actress who yearned for the stage and a lawyer who didn't like to sue people. Naturally, he went into the hospitality business, then the speaking business. In his first career, Jack assisted clients like Starbucks and Chick-fil-A deliver much better customer experiences. Today, he talks about creating the buyer-first experience, living the B2B sales life, and how to love the battle. Jack founded the Buyers Experience Academy to show B2B teams how to engage, win, and keep customers loyal to sustain growth. Hello, Jack.
Hello, John.
Great to have you here today. This is another episode of To Talk Smart. I'm talking with Jack Mackey, the president of the Kansas City chapter of the National Speakers Association. Jack, how did you end up as the president of the National Speakers Association for your chapter?
Well, there was a lot of excitement in the speaking business, as you know, over the last couple of years in particular, and the membership in our organization, a lot of the more senior people who made their livings really dependent on the stage situation had that yanked out from under them. And we just didn't have a lot of people to choose from. So I didn't go through a long succession plan to become president. I thought I could help out. I'm at a time in my life when I'm more than happy to give back. So many people have helped me out. So I got in because there were few choices, and I was a person who I could do this job, and I felt like, as I said, this was just a time that I'd be more than willing to spend my time on it.
What's your background and how does it relate to you as a speaker?
This is like this takes almost a mini life story to tell you this. So I'll keep it short, and you can ask me to expand if you want to.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I've always loved English. I've been a great English student. I always loved books and reading. And then the real thing that turned me into the speaking thing was George Carlin, the comedian. So when I was 15, 16, George Carlin I just thought he was a genius. He wasn't just funny, but he was such a beautiful user of the language. And I know he did a lot of controversial stuff with dirty words on TV that you could use and things like that. But way before that, he just had great stuff. And I was so impressed. I used to memorize some of his bits that weren't dirty and entertain my friends with them. And I just fell in love with that. So I guess his use of language and the way he performed were the first times that I thought, wow, that looks like it would be fun to do. But I never wanted to make my living as a comedian or a speaker. That wasn't in my mind. I just felt that way. So I ended up getting involved. I was in the restaurant business for a long time. By a long time, I mean about 18 years. I was an apprentice chef early in the days when you could actually get trained in the United States instead of having to be an apprentice coming out of Europe. And that led me to open a number of restaurants with partners. And I did the restaurant commercials on the radio. So I was using my speaking skills there. And then I was getting invited to give cooking classes. And some of these were done with a big overhead mirror. And so I just ended up speaking about what I understood and without getting paid for it. And then one day, I don't know, something happened. I was asked to MC a banquet where we were giving awards for, like the chef of the year and the restaurateur of the year. And I knew everybody in the audience. And I thought, this will be fun. Well, I got down there and I realized, man, emceeing and not doing a prepared speech I wasn't all that good at that. And so I looked around and I said, how can I get better at this? And the first thing I discovered was Toastmasters. And it happened at the Toastmasters Club, met at a coffee shop, literally. I don't know. I could walk to it from my apartment. How's that for convenient?
That's perfect.
So they met every Monday morning, and I did that for a period of time. And I sort of deliberately improved my speaking skills. And I ended up, going to the distinguished Toastmaster level in that, and got involved in district leadership. So that's how I got started in speaking.
Seems like a lot of people in the speakers associations have some background or some connection to Toastmasters. Do you feel like that gave you some good preparation to be more on stage, more prepared, like you said, as a MC or whatever your duties were? Did that help prepare you?
Yes, and specifically, I learned something from one of the world champions of public speaking at Toastmasters. We brought him to our district convention. And so I got to spend a lot of time with him, and he just had this simple idea. He said, there's only one way to get better at speaking. And he said, there's three ways you can get better at speaking. And they are stage time, and stage time. That gentleman's name is Darren LaCroix, so he may be known to some of the people watching this. And that's what Toastmasters gave me. It just gave me a lot of stage time. I was willing to put in the time. I loved what I was doing. It was fun. And that's how I ended up getting in a situation where the opportunity came up to get paid to speak in an unusual way. Maybe I should ask you before I jump into this, do you remember back in the late 80s, the birth of this phenomenon known as the one-day seminar, the one-day business seminar?
Yeah, I was 4 then, Jack, so I
okay.
No, I don't recall that, but I was not 4.
Well,
but
let me throw out a couple names. Fred Pryor. Fred Pryor was actually a preacher here in Kansas City, and he started Fred Pryor seminars. And that was, hey, send your people for $99 or $59, whatever. And they would teach fundamental skills, how to supervise people if you've never been a supervisor before, and how to manage multiple priorities, those types of evergreen business needs that never go away. And so that business came into being, and people who had seen me speak, I guess I'm still not that good of a speaker. But people who had seen me speak said, Jack, you should look into this. And so I did. And so I ended up getting hired by a company called National Seminars. And through that experience, I learned about one piece of the speaking business. I learned how to do a 6-hour seminar. I learned how to interact. I learned how to engage people, so I didn't have to do all the work, all 6 hours. I learned how to entertain and make it a fun time for people. And I was able to do all of that without ever having to learn how to market my business, because I was a contract speaker for a company and they did all the marketing. That was their job. And then the better you performed as a speaker based on feedback from the audiences and the performance in selling related books and tapes and things like that on the topics, you'd get more work. So I was working 180 days a year without ever having to worry about how to get a speech, except to do a good job on the speeches that I already gave for them. So that was my limited exposure to the business of speaking, where if you were good at speaking, you didn't have to worry about going and getting a gig if you got a contract arrangement with a company like Career Track or National Seminars or something like that.
I know of other people who've done a similar thing to that. Do you think that's still a viable way for people to get into the speaking business?
That's been, I sort of doubt it, but I can't speak from very recent experience because I haven't done that for years. Remember, I said that was back in the 80s when I got started. And I know for years that business did continue to grow, and Kansas City seems to be like a hub. We have Skill Path here now. And so there's still many people that have gotten into the business, but I don't know if post-COVID and into the hybrid speaking market, if it's a viable way to get in. But there's always been people who spoke and made their living largely because they were good at speaking, but really never got good at developing business for themselves. And so I wish I could say, hey, I know that still works. But as I tell you how I got into the business, it worked for me back then in the late 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important too to keep in mind. Like you said, you didn't have to market because they did that for you. And a lot of people who are coming into the speaking business now are not sure how to market, but that's a huge piece of what they have to do for themselves if they want to grow their business, or they have to hire somebody to do that. The hard thing about that is if you're not speaking, you might not have money to hire somebody to get you to, the different places. So marketing is definitely one of those things. If you had to do it now, if you had to go out there and market yourself now, what would you do?
Well, before I say how I would do that now, and I, by the way, I've made my living as a business-to-business sales executive and leader and chief evangelist of organizations. So I have done that, but I want to back up and say the one thing that I learned is there's no sense to get really good at marketing if you don't have a fantastic presentation. So if you're not really knowledgeable and cannot speak in a really entertaining, interesting, informative, compelling way about a topic that you really love, I just don't think marketing is the answer. And in fact, my motto is you can market all you like, but people believe what they experience. So the way I was able to build a foundation was I had a number of people just in my Rotary Club that perceived from the way I introduced other speakers and the little stage time that I got at this Rotary Club that had 800 members, that I had them asking me, hey, would you mind coming while we hand out our bonus checks and just give a little talk about it, somehow make it more interesting than us just handing out the bonus checks. So I actually had people ask me to speak for them. And then they would insist on paying me. They'd say, well, I can't pay these outrageous speaker fees, but, I'd at least give you $500. And so that's how I got started speaking for money. So before I go on to talk about marketing, let me just, if there's one thing I'm just insistent that people understand, Michael LaBeouf put it best. Michael LaBeouf was one of those guys that was a National Speakers Association member. I heard a lot of his tapes when I would not go to the convention, but I could buy the tapes. And then I bought his whole album. And I think, what was his album called? It was How to Win Customers and Keep Them for Life. That was Michael LaBeouf. And he said, very pertinent to speakers, he said, your best marketing is your best speech. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I'd be happy to chat a little bit about business to business marketing if you'd like me to.
Well, let's stay with that idea for just a second. If someone is not sure if they have that dynamic award-winning speech and they want to get out there, it's kind of that thing where if you wait till you're perfect or you wait till you're great, you may never get out there. And some people will say, imperfect is far better than waiting till you're perfect. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. There are many levels of speaking. What's the word? Speaking charisma, impactful speaking. There's many levels of that impact. And if you're speaking about a topic that's very important to, if you're talking about how to lead other people and you're talking about things like emotional intelligence or delighting customers, anything that's got an emotional component, then it's more important than, hey, I need to know how to develop a website. I need to know how to hire people more effectively. When things are more business oriented than they are purely human oriented, I think that the word of just having a memorable talk that people will never forget, that varies quite a bit, and very few people get into that business just starting at the top.
Exactly.
You make your way up the ladder, and that takes years. It's not a question of weeks or months. So I agree with you.
What would you say? So this is one. So if we talk about stage in terms of eloquence and how we deliver that dynamic, that award-winning speech, what are some things that a beginning speaker should concentrate on, or where do they look to get more experience or the idea that they're doing something that's on the right track, what would they do as beginning speakers to get that expertise in being eloquent on stage?
Well, a good example is the Speakers Academy that you all do, where your first efforts are going to be, can I get in front of local service clubs? Or if I'm an expert in sales, can I get in front of local sales organizations, or lead generation outfits like BNI or something? The key is, it still goes back to stage time, stage time, stage time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I did that through Toastmasters because it was structured and it was simple, it was straightforward, but doesn't mean I didn't work hard at it. I worked very hard at it. And, I can still remember the day when I discovered that giving a 7-minute speech was taking me 7 hours.
Exactly.
7 hours of getting ready to give a 7-minute speech. And then I started to really respect that just getting up there and winging it, that's sometimes effective, but if you're going to get paid to speak, it just takes a lot of practice. And a lot of times that means you get a practice for free. Beginning speakers have to do that.
Right. I think that's important to remember too, because those free situations where they might say, I've got an organization, I'd love to have you come in. But if you're never in front of those people, you never get that chance to be invited to go speak somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why, to me, one of the main ways that beginning speakers can make faster progress is they have to be really good at something. They have to understand, know, and be able to demonstrate, explain something. Then they don't have to go back and do a bunch of work on what's my content. Is it really good? Is it worth it? You don't have to research their own content. It's more than about making your content compelling in the way it's presented. But I think that's the way forward. Like as I said, I get started giving cooking lessons and demonstrations of things that I did for a living. And so I think that's one suggestion I would make to beginning speakers. If you're really a master at a topic, that gives you so much content, personal stories that people relate to very well.
Drawing on personal experience, drawing on something you do day in and day out. It's interesting too that you said winging it, that works for some people. But you mentioned comedians before, and they make it seem like they stepped on stage and all of a sudden they're telling these masterful jokes and the audience is laughing. What the audience doesn't know is they probably spent 7 hours or 70 hours or 700 hours to make that joke work. And there's a lot that goes into that preparation, but preparation in something that you know really well makes it 100 times easier.
I agree 100%. The best example of that, I think, or one of the best examples of a guy who looks like he's winging it, Robin Williams. Robin Williams looked like it was just coming out of him like automatically. And he worked so hard to be prepared. I mean, even to go on the Tonight Show with Jonathan Winters or something, those guys, they were ready. In fact, you watch guys and ladies who get invited to speak on national television shows, especially if they're funny. Well, they're not funny by accident.
I'm a musician too, so that preparation is really critical. Someone who stands up in a performance and hasn't done the preparation, the audience knows. They can tell that they have not done the preparation. They haven't put in the hours and hours of practice, either in front of a group or in front of a camera, to get the expertise they need.
Yes, I really feel fortunate because I stumbled into that contract speaking business without really knowing that was going to be the key to getting to the next level. And I mean, just for context, when I say the next level, like I would get paid, I think $400 a talk, but I would talk 5 days a week, 25 weeks a year. And then I could make additional money if people really would respond to me and ask the company, hey, could we have this guy come in and give a customized version of what we just saw there? Really the key. And I always looked back on it and I said, yeah, when you speak in 180 days a year, you're never going to go very long without giving a speech or a seminar in my case. So finding a way to be in front of people on a regular basis is huge.
Yeah, I think it's critical. And you mentioned Darren LaCroix. I've done some work with him. He came to the Wisconsin chapter
Yeah.
and spoke to us. I've done some recorded things he's done about storytelling, but that whole stage time thing is critical. And he
Yeah.
talks about that all the time. Right now, I'm involved in doing a 77-day video challenge with, not necessarily with him, but through his organization. He's putting that out to people. Take the challenge. And I've done a lot of videos, but I've always polished them and then edited them. He said, push the Facebook Live button or YouTube Live or Instagram Live. And now you may not see that audience, but you're still in front of a camera with live people there. Tell us about your business to business work and your sales work with executives, those kinds of things that you mentioned earlier.
Sure. Well, the companies that I've worked for have typically been what would be called small to medium-sized businesses. Just for example, say a company's doing $50 million in revenue a year. And they've had, they'll have 100 employees, maybe 130 employees, depending on the nature of the business. That's the kind of company that I would work with and for. And some of the clients that we'd sell to would be really big companies, really big restaurants. I mean, I'm talking about Starbucks, Kohl's, Chick-fil-A, and the size of the client is way bigger than the size of the companies that I was working with. But that way I kind of got an education on how to be successful in a small and medium-sized business, and then also how to successfully sell to larger clients that have a lot of processes on, their expectations for proposals, marketing materials. You've got to have all kinds of, expectations are now, not only will you have a website, but you'll have a proposal that's shareable, and many different ways of communicating with people business to business, and you've got to be flexible. So I mean, Zoom was a product that I used in business long before Zoom was popular, and Zoom was the grandson or fifth cousin of WebEx and all these Citrix-based programs that came along before Zoom. So there's one thing that now today, you mentioned doing this video challenge. A lot of folks today are using personalized videos for prospecting or communicating, not just to get people on and watch a demo. But this was the kind of thing that I was selling, was a software as a service. And my special area of expertise was customer experience measurement and leadership. And the thing that I remember in particular, what made it work for me is, first of all, I was completely a hospitality-oriented person. I believed in service. I believed that if you didn't love what you did, everybody would know it. You just were kidding yourself. So I always brought that to my job. And eventually, one of the companies that hired me, and I was with them for 14 years, they named me their chief evangelist. So even though the sales were sophisticated and sometimes very complex and sometimes multiple millions of dollars, we also sold down to the level where the sales were like $100,000, but that this was a continuing revenue. So there was a lot of value in investing in a lot of the marketing that accompanies sales. And I've already mentioned things like websites and video tools and things like that. But the fundamentals are still, you've got to get where the people are that buy your product or service. And so when I started doing some of this for myself, I would focus on companies that were in sales, because I'm good at selling and I have a lot of personal stories about selling. I have a system for selling. And likewise, if I was selling to companies that wanted to excel at customer experience, then I would attend a lot of conferences about customer experience. I would meet a lot of people in that business. And LinkedIn is the greatest invention ever to come to business sales. So having a way to use LinkedIn in a way that you find people that you want to be in front of, you expose yourself through your post presence, your thoughts on LinkedIn. I think those are ways that are directly applicable to what I would call business to business sales.
We're not necessarily what do you think about this? We're not necessarily trying to find the audience we'll speak to, but we're trying to find the buyer who will put us in front of the audience that they want us to speak to.
Oh, that is so true. That is so true. For me, when speaking was just primarily a side gig, I had a full-time job. I had a lot of stage time through that job. But what I ended up doing was somebody at one of these speakers bureaus heard about me. And, as a speaker working with a speakers bureau, you are their product. They're representing you. And so this particular lady heard about me, and she knows everybody in Kansas City. And she heard good things about me. So she got me to speak for one of her small clients. And the next thing I knew, she was keeping me busy. So once again, I wasn't really doing the marketing face to face, but every sale ultimately came down to, okay, the marketing effort has got to where these people want to talk to you. And once they want to talk to you, then essentially those conversations are going to be typically focused around how well can you make this company or these individuals or a person making a decision, how can you make them feel confident that A, you're a good fit for them, you understand them, you listen, you're not just so eager to talk about yourself and what you can do for them, but it's more, you're more in a partnership framework, a state of mind that says, yeah, this is a topic I've loved for a long time. And if this is something you're interested in, let's spend a few minutes on the phone, just making sure we might have something to offer each other that would be of mutual benefit. So
I think we lose audiences too, or prospects we're talking to in a business to business setting when we make it all about us.
Oh.
And I don't remember the show I was watching. I think it was called something like Partner Track. It's a new Netflix show.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat down for this presentation, and the first thing they did was spew out all these things about how good our company is. And even in that setting, which was Hollywood or whatever, you could see the prospects kind of glazing over, like, you're not telling us anything that you're going to do for us.
Yeah.
And they lost them. So it's really about that prospect, that audience. What do they need? What do they? One person put it this way. He was a motivational speaker. He came and talked to our junior high school kids.
Yeah.
He said when he was talking about getting booked with our school, what is it that you want them to hear from you? In other words, you want your words to come through my mouth. I'm happy to do that for you. So it's another way for them to get their message across, and having somebody from the outside who appears to be an expert do that.
Yes, and that's true. One of the advantages of being an outside quote expert is there's no baggage on your credibility. If you've worked for a company and they don't always practice what they preach, it's hard for them to come across as fresh and excited about a new approach when you've been there 3 years and you've never seen them act this way before. And sometimes that's the fun of it too. They want to bring in somebody that people end up going, wow, that was great. We need to do some of that. And that's one approach. Another approach I find is that if you try to do a narrower audience, instead of having a topic that's for everybody, the more narrow your audience is, the more you actually understand what problems they need to solve or their company needs to solve for their customers. And that's what makes business to business kind of exciting, because B2B has to understand how to get their people to understand the problems of their clients' customers so that they can recommend solutions that are really appropriate. And that's what always made it so much fun for me.
Right.
And so when you're selling yourself, it's very much as you said there, John, the person has a message that they want out, and they want it from a fresh voice, but they also don't want that fresh voice to come in and light a fire in a way that they don't want. They don't want a revolution. Yeah,
that could be a little dangerous for their organization. What are some examples, Jack, of, like, instead of this broad general topic, how people can really niche down into something that's very specific for a specific audience? Can you just give a couple of examples that you can think of?
Sure. My own life is a great example of that. So I sold business to business services in the customer experience realm, just as customer experience was just hitting the this trending line, and it was starting to show up at the Harvard Business Review. It was just starting to become an important topic, and the words customer service were being switched to customer experience. Well, the first place that I migrated to was restaurants, hotels, luxury businesses, where I had clients in those areas. I knew the problems they were trying to solve. I had been in those businesses. So, I mean, it was just common sense for me. That's what I was obviously going to be best fitted for. And there's no doubt that helped me be far more successful than if I had picked some irrelevant business or been hired by somebody to go after some irrelevant business. I'd have first had to get very competent about any business before I would feel ethically even qualified to talk with them about how it's going to help them solve their problems. So,
Right.
Yeah.
You're right too. As new speakers, we tend to think, well, everybody needs my topic. No, someone said it this way, you know, you want to have your audience, instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, you want to have that be like an inch wide and a mile deep. And that's where, you know, you can find that niche and really focus in on that and have all the work you want.
You know, and how that works, at least in my experience, is let's just take my comment about restaurants. So I worked with a lot of restaurants. Well, restaurants are a lot of times franchised. So now you get to understand franchise businesses. Well, franchising is a model. It's a certain kind of business. And so I found a natural extension there where people in the franchise business were very interested in what my expertise was, which was customer experience measurement and management. And in fact, it's interesting, the high level problem that you solve for people with customer experience is the greatest threat to a sustainably growing business is a lack of customer loyalty. They got a lot of choices, they're not particularly loyal to you. Somebody wrote a book called Customer Satisfaction is Worthless, Customer Loyalty is Priceless. And so that's a big concept. And when you could talk about it down at the customers within a restaurant level, there's not a big stretch from that to customers in a retail franchise concept that sells not food, but they sell retail. So they got retail consumers. And so that's the way that the business kind of spreads out. And all of a sudden, yeah, you do have a lot to offer anybody that works with consumers. Mm-hmm. So that was my experience anyway.
Jack, we've talked about a lot of good ideas for beginning speakers. You mentioned things like stage time, presenting a really powerful, dynamic, exciting, passionate presentation, and being really specific about who you're targeting as the buyer of your speech, and then who that audience is. Do you have another thought or two as we bring this interview to a close about things that people beginning their speaking business really need to keep at the forefront as they're going forward?
Yes, I think that I'll tell you what surprised me. Because I worked for organizations that were, like I said, small or medium businesses, but still, I mean, significant sized companies. When you're doing $50, $100 million in business, a lot of the work that you have to do as an individual entrepreneur, you never see. I mean, stuff is, you have an IT department to install software that's new to you. You have a training department to teach you how to do new stuff and find out what the new rules are. You have somebody else developing the website. You even have people that are hired to give you leads if you're in sales, or you're hired to create leads without having to sell them. So you have this whole ecosystem. When you're an entrepreneur in business, wow, you just don't realize how much time it takes to build a website. You don't know how much time it takes to do the simple things, like you've got to go get not just a bank account, but you got to get an EIN number, for tax purposes. And then instead of just doing an easy W-2 at the end of the year form, you've got to do all kinds of complex tax accounting you didn't even know it existed. And my lessons were even further, go into things like PowerPoint. And you realize that you had PowerPoint experts right next to you, top, bottom, sideways. And so if you ever had any problems, you could just get that help. Well, now you've got to go on, you got to teach yourself how to use PowerPoint that really looks good, not mediocre. And same with business tools. You've got to learn to use, software for business management, CRM systems, and financial systems. And I'm telling you, if you're anything like me, if you're a beginning speaker and you've not owned your own business before that, you're gonna be surprised at how much of that there is. And in fact, I have to tell you, John, I think being involved in a National Speakers Association chapter, where you can get close to people, they become your new ecosystem. And you can sort of ask those people, how do you do that? How do you do that? What company do you use to answer the phone for you when you don't want to hire people to answer the phone? Can't afford to do that, but you can't answer the phone all the time. So you learn things from each other. Pardon me. And that's what I learned. I mean, you really have to have respect for developing business processes.
That's what I found too, belonging to NSA. They really become our family, that we can count on, rely on people to help us out. I've had people over and over say, give me a call, I'll walk you through it, I'll talk you through it. And they become people that they're my go-to people, like you said, that I know I can count on to get this piece of advice, not necessarily this piece of advice, but this piece. And it's really helpful, and they're really willing. That whole spirit of Cabot is evident in our chapter, and I am assuming in your chapter as well.
Completely agree with that. And I think that's one reason why NSA has been successful for so long. Even though there's been a lot of changes in the speaking business, you still need a community. You can't, it's too time consuming to do all this stuff by yourself, to learn it from scratch. And as you said, it's not so much that somebody has to give you a seminar on what they've learned, but just point you in the right direction, point you to the right product, keep you away from the failed products that they've bumped into. And I just, again, you have to be realistic. If you're speaking because you want to make your living as a speaker, or even if it's just a side gig like it was for me, my gosh, I had to create all kinds of stuff just for doing my 10 or 20 speeches a year, when it was just a side thing and it was a part-time thing. And so I just can't think of a better way than to get exposed to people who have figured out those processes and are willing to share them. And that would be something that I would really focus on. If I was a beginner, I would have gotten a lot clearer and a lot more, disciplined around the processes of how is I going to not just sell business, but then once I got the business, how was I going to deliver it in a way that was repeatable and still tailor it for each client, but be realistic. And, if it takes 70 hours to do what does that mean? A 10-minute talk is, 70-minute talk is 70 hours. And that's just getting the speech ready.
Right.
And then you got to book travel, and you've got to develop relationships with the people that you're going to speak with or for. And it's very, very unrealistic. You don't know. And then later on, I'm sure if you haven't already, somebody will tell you, you have to charge more. Not because you're greedy, but you can't make a profitable business if it takes you 150 hours to execute a piece of work that you're getting paid, $1,500 for it. That's just not sustainable. And so anyway, those are some of the lessons that I've learned.
Well, that's something that's right too. I think people have to take into account, but don't necessarily see the preparation that goes into their hour-long talk for their company. But it's the years of experience, it's the trial and error. It's like, oh, that didn't work, or I really blew that, I won't ever do that again. And so we have to build that expertise and experience, life experience, into what we charge our clients.
Yep. And you know what else I've learned too, along with the charging, is I've learned people will share their contracts with you, and they'll say, well, we do the contract like this because this happened to us if we didn't have that protection. This happened to us when they canceled things during COVID and we already put in tons of work. Now we're not going to give the talk. And with that, we're going to go out of business because we can't give the talk, but we have already spent the effort. So I think I've learned just as many things from people, how they do business and how they protect themselves and come up with language that's realistic. Because anytime people sit in the audience, man, this guy's making a fortune. They're probably paying him $10,000 to talk to us for 45 minutes. I ought to get in that business. Well, whoa, that is so not it. And so the contracts that I've seen make changes are that there's no longer deposits. Instead of deposits, these are the pre-delivery fees, right? That's why we need money in advance. We're spending money in advance. We're expending effort in advance. So these are not deposits. These are pre-delivery fees, and or whatever name you want to give them. But I've learned a lot about that from other people that figured it out before I did.
I like that term, pre-delivery fees. I had not heard that before, but that's a great way to think about it.
Sure.
Yeah. So Jack, this interview is a perfect example of NSA and the spirit of Cabot. We've been talking for a while, and you've just been sharing some great ideas with the people who are going to be able to see this interview. And I want to thank you for being here with me on this interview, and look forward to working with you and talking with you in the future.
It was a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on wrapping this into your video challenge.
That's right, I can count it.
There you go.
Thank you, Jack.
Great to see you again, John. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of 2 Talk Smart. Look for more episodes in the very near future. I'm John Nepper. Let's change the world one conversation at a time.